Who will the Atlanta Falcons select with their first four selections in the top 3 rounds of the 2024 NFL Draft? It is Mock Draft Monday.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Mr. Drew, aka Sirius Black, aka the Jolly Green Giant, aka the iron that sharpens the iron, aka Mr. AKA. And I appreciate each and every one of you that is every dayer of this illustrious pod that make it your first watch, your first listen of the day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode is a Mock Draft Monday. I'll be breaking down my 3-round mock where I went through all the picks, picking for all the teams, the top 100 picks in the draft. But the brunt of our conversation will be about who the Falcons pick, not who everybody else picks. But for each round, I'll read off who I had going leading up to the Falcons picks. And we'll kick things off with round one. And for those of you watching on YouTube, of course, you'll have graphics. I'll try to leave a link in the description for the audio listeners if they want to be able to peruse that mock draft at their heart's content. But starting off in round one, the Chicago Bears select number 1 overall, Caleb Williams, quarterback, USC. Number 2, Washington takes Jaden Daniels, quarterback, LSU. 3, New England takes Drake May, quarterback, North Carolina. 4, Arizona takes Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver, Ohio State. Number 5, the Minnesota Vikings trade up with the LA Chargers to get J.J. McCarthy, quarterback, Michigan. 6, the Giants select Malik Neighbors, wide receiver, LSU. 7, Tennessee gets Joe Alt, offensive tackle, Notre Dame.
The 8th pick, the Atlanta Falcons select
Dallas Turner, edge rusher, Alabama. 9, the Chicago Bears select Rome Odunze, wide receiver, Washington. And 10, the New York Jets select Brock Bowers, tight end of Georgia. And I'll leave that up there for a few more seconds if you need to pause your screen so that you can look at the entirety of the first round here with the graphics. But we'll remove that and we'll break down this sort of one of many scenarios that could happen with these first 8 selections in the NFL draft. And, you know, this is the scenario where, you know, Rome Odunze's on the board. And this is the scenario where the Falcons could go best player available and take the 3rd wide receiver at 8th overall. We've discussed that last week on Mock Draft Monday and why the Falcons would probably prefer Rome Odunze over Malik Neighbors. And we'll see, right? You know, this is a scenario where I think the Falcons are most likely to field trade offers because I think that 3rd wide receiver is most likely to get the most realistic possibility. You know, there's also the possibility of a quarterback falling to 8, but I don't think that's a realistic possibility. But this is the most likely scenario where the Falcons will get legit trade offers. But in this scenario, I couldn't really justify the Falcons moving back because the 2 teams that I think would be most likely willing to trade up to get Rome Odunze would be Chicago picking at 9 and the Jets picking at 10. And neither one of those teams really has the trade assets to really move up. They're like each one of those teams has like 5 picks. You know, I think Chicago has like 3 or 4 picks in this draft. And the Jets have like 3 or 4 picks as well. So couldn't really justify that, but you know, maybe, you know, there's a lot of rumors about Buffalo, maybe making a Julio Jones like trade to go from 28 to the top. In this mock draft, I had Buffalo going from 28 to 15 with the Colts to get Brian Thomas Jr., the wide receiver out of LSU. But you know, we'll see on that front. But you know, there's absolutely a scenario where the Falcons take a trade to move back 1 or 2 spots, maybe pick up a 3rd or 4th round pick or something like that, or maybe a future pick, right? Those 2 teams, the Bears and the Jets, maybe they offer, you know, you some 2025 draft picks instead of 2024 draft picks. So we'll see how that goes. But, you know, I, of course, have them taking Dallas Turner at 8 overall. We'll talk about why I think that makes the most sense. But, I don't think Dallas Turner is the definite pick. I think he's probably the betting favorite, but I could see the Falcons going with any of these edge rushers, whether it's Jared Verse of Florida State or Laiatu Latu of UCLA. I have Latu going 19 to the Rams, Verse going 22 to the Eagles in this mock draft. But to me, I lean Dallas Turner mostly because based off of the Falcons' tendencies over the last 3 years with their draft picks under Terry Fontenot, it seems to me that Turner is the most likely pick for the Falcons, right? He is a consensus top 10 pick. And we've talked before about how the Falcons have typically in the early rounds do not stray far from consensus, right? I've compiled 22 different draft boards and Turner is the number 9 overall player on that consensus draft board, right? And he appears in the top 10 in 12 out of those 22 draft boards. And you compare that to only 5 for Verse and only 1 for Laiatu Latu. By the way, Verse is 12 on that consensus board and Latu's 18 on that board. Now, the other factor that I think plays in Turner's favor is how young he is, right? That's part of the developmental upside that we talk about with Turner. He's only sort of scratched the surface of his potential through 2+ years in college at Alabama. But we know the Falcons have consistently drafted young players in their first rounds, right? All 3 of their first round picks were 21 or younger. Pitts and London were 20 on draft night. Bijan was 21. And I don't think that's necessarily the biggest factor, but I certainly think when we're having the conversation with these top 3 edges, it could potentially break the tie, right? Both Verse and Latu are 23, and that's a big reason why people like myself and others kind of think they may be maxed out. Like the player that you're getting right now is a player that they're always going to be in the NFL, while Turner has a lot more growth potential. And then the other factor that I think leads to the Falcons favoring Turner over some of these other guys is the length, right? When it's come to front 7 players, especially pass rushers, over the last 3 years, the Falcons have really preferred long guys with, arm length, right? Ade Ogundeji was 93rd percentile arm length. Taquan Graham was 94th percentile. Arnold Ebiketie was 74th percentile. Zach Harrison was 98th percentile. D'Angelo Malone is the lone exception who was only 34th percentile in terms of arm length. And, he's also the guy that's played the least among those guys, right? You look at Dallas Turner, right, who's 80th percentile in arm length, Jared Verse is 49th percentile, and Laiatu Latu's 16th percentile. But you also look at the Falcons free agent pickups. Guys like Lorenzo Carter, Barkevious Mingo, Calais Campbell, David Onyemata are also guys that have, plus arm length for their respective positions. Even their linebackers, right? When you look at Caden Ellis and Troy Anderson and Rashawn Evans and Michael Walker, all of those guys I think were like 40th or 45th percentile or higher in terms of their arm length and wingspan as well. So, there is a clear tendency. So to me, that's why based off of past tendencies, I do think Dallas Turner is the best bet to be the Falcons pick, and FanDuel still favors those odds. I think the one thing that to me would make me, gun shy about, heading on over to FanDuel Sportsbook and putting the money down is the possibility that the Falcons do go BPA and just take the wide receiver there, right? Now, these are all the tendencies that suggest to me that Dallas Turner is going to be the pick, but we might be throwing those tendencies out the window because the Falcons have a new coaching staff. We might be sitting there going like, oh, well, those are the tendencies that the Falcons had under Arthur Smith. They may have different, leanings under Raheem Morris. That may be the thing. They may not care about length. They may not care about age, right? We know Laiatu Latu was at Washington, the University of Washington, when Jimmy Lake was the defensive coordinator there, as well as when he was the head coach. He wasn't playing then because he was medically retired. And that's another tendency that we've noticed in the past with several of the Falcons' first-round picks being guys that have various coaching connections to current members of the Falcons staff. Kyle Pitts, his position coach at Florida, was also the position coach of Justin Peele, the former Falcons tight ends coach when Justin Peele was playing in the pros with the Chargers back in the day. Bijan Robinson's position coach initially at Texas was also on that Bears coaching staff alongside guys like Dave Ragone, the former Falcons offensive coordinator. So, with that coaching connection between Latu and Washington, would that override some of these other tendencies? Perhaps, right? Now, I recently did a breakdown of Dallas Turner and some of the reasons why I like his potential, but he's got a ways to go. in terms of his development to really sort of refine his pass rush. He has the tools that you look for, but he needs to refine that. And I did a breakdown for that for the Locked On Falcons Insiders. You can hit the link in the description below to become a Locked On Falcons Insider. It's a 14-day free trial. Then it's $4.99 a month after that. So if you sign up, you'll get that Turner breakdown for free. You'll probably get my next week's breakdown, which is Jared Verse. Did a Latu breakdown last week. We've done the top 5 quarterbacks. We've done all of the Falcons, or not all of the Falcons, but the Falcons' initial offensive free agent pickups, film breakdowns. But not only do you get film, you get that one-on-one connection with me. You can hit me up, hit me those late night texts or whatever, essentially, whether they're Falcons related or not Falcons related. You can do that by hitting that link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/lockedonfalcons. But yeah, I think that's worth your while. So for me, like, if we're talking about the biggest reason why I would, if we get to draft night and the Falcons don't go Dallas Turner, to me, the biggest reason is basically it's going to probably take, the better part of 2 or 3 years for Dallas Turner to kind of reach his potential as a pass rusher in the NFL. And if, the sort of Falcons pressure, to win now, overrides their, patience when it comes to a player like Dallas Turner, that could lead them to a player like Verse or Latu that I think are probably a little bit more ready-made to impact in 2024 than Turner is as a pass rusher. So that's definitely a possibility. I think another factor that plays in Dallas Turner's favor is he's also very good scheme fit, given what Raheem Morris wants to do with simulated pressures and whatnot, and having that versatility to be able to drop into coverage and be effective there. But we'll see if the Falcons pull the trigger on Dallas Turner. We'll see who the Falcons get in round 2 of this mock draft, and we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Passion, drive, patience. It is the formula for winning championships, and is also what's going to keep your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, baby. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So, of course, it is Mock Draft Monday, and I will plug another mock draft that you guys should check out, which is the Locked On NFL mock draft, live on April 17th, later this week at 7 p.m. Eastern time, on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's the ultimate 6-episode series beginning on April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern time. That's Wednesday, where you'll get, who I had the Falcons picking in round 1, and it's not a player that I just had the Falcons picking. So go check it out on Wednesday to sort of check that out. So again, that's Wednesday, April 17th, 7 p.m., streaming live on Locked On Sports Today's 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. So in round 2, let's throw up that graphic real quick, and we'll go through the first, 11 selections leading up to the Falcons pick. 33, the Carolina Panthers select Zach Frazier, center, West Virginia. 34, the Raiders trade up with the Patriots to get Michael Penix Jr., the quarterback, out of Washington. 35, Arizona gets Braden Fisk, D tackle from Florida State. 36, Washington gets Patrick Paul, offensive tackle, Houston. 37, the Chargers, Roman Wilson, wide receiver, Michigan. 38, Tennessee, Darius Robinson, D lineman from Missouri. 39, Carolina gets Keon Coleman, wide receiver, Florida State. 40, Washington gets Max Melton, cornerback, Rutgers. 41, Green Bay gets Kieran Amagaji, offensive tackle from Yale. 42, Houston gets Chris Jenkins, defensive tackle from Michigan. And 43, the Atlanta Falcons select Ladd McConkey, wide receiver from Georgia. And that kicks off a little mini run for the wide receivers. And again, I will pause so that you can peruse, if you're watching on YouTube, to look at the rest of round 2. Again, link in the description below. And sorry that you'll have to squint on this one. The graphics aren't not as clean, trying to show the round 2 stuff. But let's talk about Ladd McConkey, one of the standouts of the Senior Bowl, dynamic pass catcher. Will probably come in, immediately be the Falcons' number 3 wide receiver, be a slot guy. If he's not, then he can also contribute on special teams. If that's the case, as the number 4 wide receiver. We've mentioned before how the Falcons may be looking primarily for a slot guy, with Raheem Morris indicating that Darnell Mooney is seen, and the Falcons paying Darnell Mooney like he is this guy as that X wide receiver on the outside, playing that sort of Brandon Cooks / Tutu Atwell role that we've seen in the Rams offense over the last 7-8 years under Sean McVay, that we're expecting Zach Robinson to borrow heavily from as the new offensive coordinator here in Atlanta. Drake London playing that Z role, which is the Robert Woods / Puka Nacua role, which is more of that featured target in the offense. But of course, one of the other featured targets in the Rams offense over the years has been none other than their slot receiver, which is Cooper Kupp, right? And while you'll probably hear a lot of people making comparisons between Ladd McConkey and Cooper Kupp, they're not the same. Cooper Kupp is a much bigger player, but I think Ladd is a much more explosive player. And I think the one thing that they do have overlap in, which is they're both impactful run blockers in the run game. I think McConkey is one of the better run blocking wide receivers that I've seen in this draft class. And that always endears me to a wide receiver when you get after it in the run game. But, I think the main knock on Ladd McConkey in terms of his NFL future is his struggles to beat press coverage, right? Which is why a lot of people see him primarily as a slot receiver, although he has spent the bulk of his time in college playing on the outside. But as a slot receiver, you're less likely to see press coverage than you would as an outside receiver. And so I think that's an ideal role for Ladd McConkey until he can, really develop the sort of releases and whatnot that he can in order to be more effective against press coverage. But I do think he makes a lot of sense as a high volume number 2 wide receiver in this offense, that sort of security blanket for Kirk Cousins that can win on the short, intermediate levels that will be, heavily featured in this offense with Kirk Cousins at the helm. Some of the comps I've heard for Ladd McConkey is not Cooper Kupp, but, I like these comps, whether it, ultimately they will be my comps, we'll see. But I've heard Emmanuel Sanders, Tyler Lockett. I think those are more kind of what Ladd McConkey is bringing to the table. 2 guys that can play both inside and outside. And, 2 guys that were high-end number 2s, right? Sanders probably had his best years as the number 2 to Demaryius Thomas in Denver for a couple of years. Lockett, is he the number 1, or is DK Metcalf the number 1? 1A, 1B sort of dynamic there in Seattle. But that's the type of player that you can expect, I think, Ladd McConkey to potentially grow into, in both of those guys. And Lockett and Sanders, Sanders played like 12 years in the NFL. Lockett, I think, is going into year 10 in the NFL. So, you're hoping to see similar sort of production for Ladd McConkey here in Atlanta for the next 10 to 12 years and be that guy that can consistently get you 800, 1,000 yards or more per season. So in terms of other possibilities for this pick, again, I was leaning heavily towards the wide receivers. There's some cornerbacks that I had that could be in the mix for this pick going later in round 2. But to me, Troy Franklin was a guy that I was sort of curious about potentially taking, the Oregon wide receiver who I had going a couple of picks, maybe a pick after to the Patriots. Let me actually bring that up. What did I have, Troy? Yeah, he went 44 to the Patriots after they traded back with the Raiders to get that 44th selection. So, he makes a lot of sense. I think he's more of that like X receiver that we're projecting Mooney to be. And I think Franklin is actually arguably a better version of that player than Mooney is probably going to be. But, because, the Falcons have invested already in Mooney in that sort of role and seemingly sort of see Mooney more as that outside receiver, I went with the slot guy in Ladd McConkey. But that's our breakdown of round 2. We got 2 picks to break down in round 3. And, do the Falcons go defense again, or do they go with an offensive player? You'll just have to stay tuned and find out as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So I try to keep my competitive side tamped down, but sometimes you just got to unleash it. And one of the ways I love feeding my competitive side is with Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times, and it's a great twist on Monopoly where you can play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building amazing cities that are going to bring you big money. And the best part is having fun with your friends. And by fun, I mean messing with your friends. You get to charge them rent on the iconic properties from classic Monopoly, as well as you can rob their vaults too, so that their money becomes your money. So team up with friends and show your competitive side to all people around the world in time tournaments, as well as earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends by downloading Monopoly Go now for free on the App Store or Google Play. And guys, I want to tell you that it is now playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball season is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 guaranteed, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, super easy to use. And not only can you bet on slap shots, home runs, and slam dunks, you can bet on NFL draft props, right? The odds still favor Dallas Turner to be the number one pick, but Rome Odunze is starting to move into second place over at FanDuel Sportsbook to be the 8th overall selection, followed by Laiatu Latu, Jared Verse, and Quinyon Mitchell. So what are you waiting for? Head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon, make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. So before we continue today's episode, I want to let you guys know that the Braves are playing the Astros on Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. Catch every pitch of the Braves hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the XXM app. Search Braves. So with round 3, we have the Carolina Panthers at 65 taking Theo Johnson, the tight end from Penn State. 66, Arizona takes Chris Braswell, the edge rusher from Alabama. 67, Washington takes Adisa Isaac, edge rusher from Penn State. 68, New England takes Brandon Coleman, offensive tackle from TCU. 69, Minnesota takes Kyrie Jackson, cornerback, Oregon. 70, the Giants take Renardo Green, cornerback from Florida State. 71, Arizona takes Christian Haynes, guard from UConn. 72, the Jets take Brennan Rice, wide receiver, USC. 73, Detroit, Braylon Trice, edge rusher, Washington. 74, the Atlanta Falcons select Kamari Lassiter, cornerback from Georgia. 75, Chicago takes Austin Booker, edge rusher from Kansas. 76, Denver takes Spencer Rattler, quarterback from South Carolina. 77, New England, Jonah Ellis, edge rusher from Utah. 78, Washington, Johnny Wilson, wide receiver from Florida State. And 79, the Atlanta Falcons select Tyler Nubin, safety from Minnesota. So let you guys look at that as you squint to see all the rest of the picks in round 3. And there was a version of this mock that had, the Falcons taking Kamari Lassiter at 43 instead of, 74 here. But in redoing it, I wound up having Lassiter slide to round 3. And you've heard me talk before about how, I wonder if the Falcons might punt at the safety position, at least in terms of the early rounds. But in this situation, Nubin was there. He was the first safety taken in this mock draft. We'll see if that happens in reality. And he's kind of the consensus top safety in this year's draft. So it seemed to be pretty simple for me to be like, well, you didn't expect Nubin to be there, so might as well pull the trigger on him. And so now you're going to sit there as you've seen this mock draft with me taking 2 Georgia players with the Falcons' top 4 selections. You're going to accuse me of being a Georgia homer, which I am not. I'm not even a Georgia football fan, but, I respect the program. As they say, you got to respect, 2 national championships in the last 3 years. But, I know there's a large contingent of my listenerships that are Georgia fans. And they constantly complain about the Falcons not drafting Georgia players. And so I guess today we compensated on today's mock draft. But I do think this year does line up reasonably well for the Falcons to target a couple of Georgia players, especially on day 2. Ladd McConkey, Kamari Lassiter, Javon Bullard, the safety from Georgia, who I had going 99 to the Rams in this mock draft. I think all 3 of those players make sense for the Falcons, given their needs, given the value of the pick. So we'll see if the Falcons walk away from this draft with a Georgia player like one of those guys or somebody else, or not at all. But let's talk about Kamari Lassiter. He's not the biggest guy. He's not the best athlete or anything, but he's tough as nails. As they say, he is a damn good dog, and he absolutely has that dog in him as a cornerback. Very good in zone. Leaves something to be desired in man coverage. The Ohio State receivers, especially Marvin Harrison Jr., gave him problems able to create some easy separation on several plays in that national championship game a couple of years ago. So I think Lassiter has room to grow when it comes to improving in man coverage. I think a lot of it is more technical than it is necessarily not being an athlete. Like, he doesn't have great long speed, but his agilities were very good. And so that gives me optimism that he can still be developed. And I'm going to say a hot take that might tick off the Georgia fans that I've just won over with this podcast by selecting two players. But like, I don't think Georgia does a great job really developing their players, at least from an NFL draft standpoint. They do a great job getting those guys to be very good on Saturdays, but a lot of the Georgia players that come into the league the last couple of years are, talented but raw coming in to play football on Sundays. And so, like, to me, Georgia's that they get them develop enough that, like, Georgia's a run and hit football team, right? Like, our guys are bigger, faster, stronger than you. We can run, we can hit, and that's how we're going to win football games. And they do a good job developing their guys to be able to maximize those skill sets on Saturdays. But in terms of like the more technical nuance, like it's not really there when it comes to those guys playing on Sundays, which is part of the reason why you haven't really seen guys from Georgia in the last couple of years outside of Jalen Carter come into the league and really make that immediate impact. And it takes them a couple of years. And so I kind of think Lassiter might be the next one in that group. So I think there's upside there. He just needs to be coached up a little bit and potentially get better coaching in Atlanta than he got at Georgia. Again, Georgia fans don't come for me. Now, for Tyler Nubin, I think you'll probably hear some people call him a kind of a poor man's Antoine Winfield Jr., given they both played at Minnesota. And Nubin's he's another guy that's not an elite athlete, but I think he's a good enough athlete. I think what you like about Nubin in the similar ways that you liked about Antoine Winfield was how smart and disciplined a player he is. He has great ball skills. He's not going to have elite speed or range or anything like that. You're not going to necessarily park him as a pure, single high safety or anything like that. But I think in the split safety looks that the Falcons are likely to employ under Jimmy Lake, their new defensive coordinator, I think Nubin is a good fit to tag team with Jesse Bates in that regard. I think he also is capable of playing in the box and being a plus run defender, even if he's not going to be like necessarily that sort of enforcer in the run game as far as that goes. So we'll see if the Falcons, go in this direction, looking for DBs in round 3 in this draft and sort of which players they covet at the cornerback position and safety position. To be honest with you, your guess is probably as good as mine. Like I have a good feeling on what they would value in edge rusher and wide receiver, but in the secondary, not so much. I'm expecting the Falcons to run a zone heavy scheme under Jimmy Lake. But exactly what sort of their tendencies are going to be, I don't know. And I think we'll kind of learn a lot more about what type of scheme Jimmy Lake may be looking to run based off of which defensive backs at the cornerback and or safety position that they may wind up targeting. There's different, strokes for different folks. I guess you could say different flavors is probably the better term to use there in terms of what types of DBs that you can find in the draft. And so that's going to kind of inform us in terms of what type of scheme that we expect the Falcons to try to run in order to match those players to the right skill set. So we'll see on that. I hope you guys enjoyed that 3-round mock draft. Again, I'll try to remember to link in the description to where you can peruse it at your leisure if you just want to laugh at how terrible some of these picks are. And then I'm like, what? You had that guy go in there and like, what? You can do that by hitting the link in the description below. But that's going to do it for us here, guys. Check out the Braves game on Sirius XM. Check out Locked On Sports today. And, of course, check out that mock draft across the entire network on Wednesday night at April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Check out Locked On Sports Atlanta to get more insight into all those damn good dogs, as well as the Braves, Falcons, and Hawks. Locked On Sports Atlanta is, of course, free and available on YouTube 24/7 streaming channel, and also your free Amazon Fire TV channels app. So guys, that's going to do it for us here. Tomorrow's episode, our first listen, will be joined by a guest to talk. I don't know which guest will be on, but we'll talk more about the Falcons draft is basically the plan for tomorrow's episode. So definitely continue diving deep into the draft. That's going to do it for us here. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every